Hello and welcome to Farm Connections. I'm your host, Dan Hoffman. On today's episode, we sit down with the Senior Director of Beef Sustainability Research for the NCBA to discuss exactly what sustainability in beef looks like. We have a conversation with Darcy Johnson of Conger Meats about the hog crisis that hit the country in the spring of 2020. And the University of Minnesota Extension provides us with a new best practices segment. All here today on Farm Connections.
Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
Farm Connections made possible in part by
Absolute Energy. A locally owned facility produces 125 million gallons of ethanol annually, proudly supporting local economies in Iowa and Minnesota. Absolute Energy, adding value to the neighborhood. Minnesota Corn Growers Association, working to identify and promote opportunities for corn growers, enhance quality of life, and help others understand the value and importance of corn production to America's economy. EDP Renewables North America, owner-operator of Prairie Star and Pioneer Prairie Wind Farms, Minnesota and Iowa. EDPR wind farms and solar parks provide income to farmers and help power rural economies across the continent.
Welcome to Farm Connections. We're delighted to have Myriah Johnson from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association to talk about sustainability and raising beef. Myriah, welcome to Farm Connections.
Thank you, Dan. Happy to be here.
Well, what exactly do you do at the NCBA?
I'm the Senior Director of Beef Sustainability Research. I lead our Checkoff Sustainability Research Program. So in part of that is just to guide and direct that program, but also to obviously do research, as the title indicates, on the sustainability of the beef industry and to help us benchmark and set goals of where we might go. Working with some great researchers around the country to focus on beef sustainability, kind of where we're at as an industry, as well as some opportunities for potential improvement as well.
Well, certainly the consumers and beef producers alike must know and are asking for sustainability. What does sustainability mean?
If you ask 10 different people on the street, you're probably going to get 10 different answers. But I think fundamentally, when we listen to what people have to say, all of their answers really encompass three main areas. And I would say those are the three areas that are kind of definitionally part of sustainability. So focusing on the environmental components, as well as economic and social. And I think if we, look across the landscape at media, a lot of times, or even with our consumers, it seems like environmental gets a lot of the focus. But we know that those economic and those social components are just as important as well. And it really takes all three together to truly be sustainable.
Well, Myriah, after growing up on a beef producing farm, the economic part became very important to us. We tried to be environmental, but how do we balance the two, especially with consumers today who are more demanding than ever?
Sure, and that's tough. We've seen in a lot of places in our research where if we can improve the environmental outcome, that subsequently we also have improved economic outcomes as well, which sometimes it may not always feel like that. We may feel like if we're going to have to give up on our profit and being able to stay in business and to pass the operation on just to be environmentally friendly. But many of the things we've looked at, those things can actually go hand in hand. So for instance, if we have improvements in our water usage or efficiency, that also helps us to improve our bottom line, hopefully, and bring more dollars back into our pockets as producers.
Well, certainly there's probably ample resources, but there never seems to be enough to do all we want to do. So how do you decide what research is important and pertinent and gets funded by the checkoff dollars of beef producers?
Sure. And that's, a process we kind of just walked through recently in updating how we do that. And so for many of the listeners, they may be familiar with the Beef Long Range Plan, which is an industry long range plan that's put together once every 5 years. And so I'd say that's kind of like our guiding star document that we start with. So every 5 years after that new long range plan is published, we look at that And we'll look at how our research program can help to fill the needs and the direction that is laid out by the long-range plan. So we'll put together some drafts of a research roadmap after that will guide us over 5 years. But we also, with that research roadmap, take time to go out and solicit opinions from folks all throughout the industry. So producers themselves, as well as the folks in academia, extension, as well as our government partners, NRCS, the Agriculture Research Service, and even some of those non-government organizations. So trying to get a wide array of feedback from all those stakeholders, and further refine that, and then ultimately bring it to our research advisory board, which is a small group of about 5 or 6 people that's made up of both producers themselves from different segments of the industry, as well as researchers with experience in each of these sustainability areas. And so once we walk it through all of these steps and get all of this feedback, then we finally have this document that is really a guiding document and this research roadmap for us over the next 5 years that kind of helps us to say, this is where we're heading, this is the type of research we're going to do. And so I just mentioned that if anybody is curious to learn more about it, they could visit our website, which is beefresearch.org, and it's posted on there.
That's a very tall order to fill and a lot of balancing.
Yes, it is.
You referenced NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and also you talked a little bit earlier, we did, about beef producers and checkoff. Tell us about beef checkoff and how that's funded and who directs it.
So the beef checkoff was established back in the 80s and is a $1 per head assessment every time a live beef animal is sold. And so that dollar is collected and is captured by that Cattlemen's Beef Board. So again, made up of folks, producers, farmers, ranchers from the beef industry. And that Cattlemen's Beef Board manages those dollars, and they work with the contractors to the checkoff. And so every year we're putting forward proposals of what we can do as a research program. The Cattlemen's Beef Board is our customer, and we're here to serve and to do the research that is needed for the checkoff program. And so ultimately they allocate those dollars to the different programs, and then we go and execute with that.
Has sustainability always been part of the beef producers' work?
In some ways, yes and no. So I think as farmers and ranchers, sustainability has been inherent in what we do every day, right? But from a checkoff research program perspective, it has not always been part of the program. And so it's only been in about the past 10 years or so that we've had a formal research program regarding sustainability.
Tremendous. Give me some examples of sustainability research that's brought forth some great results.
So probably the one, if you're familiar with any of the research from our program, probably one of the things that you have likely heard of or would have heard of would be what's called a life cycle assessment. And so that would be focused on that environmental aspect of sustainability. And so because that's where we, I would say, face our challenges, or our detractors come in and say things about the beef industry, that's really where the program started, was working on that environmental side. And so doing that analysis with a life cycle assessment. And so that, can tell us a number of things. So it might tell us, how much water we use per pound of beef produced, or how much energy we consumed, as well as, how we're impacting the land and those resources. And so it's kind of looking at how we impact the environment. And so those are the major items that have come out of that, and have also provided us with some ways in which we can try to improve and go forward.
Well, I've always admired the beef animal in that it's a rumen, and it has 4 compartments to the stomach and has a tremendous ability to use forages and grasses. Does some of your research revolve around that?
It certainly does. And we've had several research projects in which we've looked at that And so we like to call that or to term that upcycling. So when cattle are taking these things that you and I, Dan, that we can't eat, I can't go out and graze that grass and do anything with it, right? But like you said, that cow's pretty impressive and that she can consume that, and she can turn that into a very high quality protein that is nutritious and tastes really great for you and I to eat. And so we've had some research around that. And in fact, one of those studies was done just a couple of years ago. It was done by doctors Tryon Wickersham and Jessica Baber-Gilreath from Texas A&M University, in which they looked at, how much protein are we putting into the beef animal? And then subsequently, how much beef are we getting out? Or how much protein are we getting out of that beef animal? And so in that, doing all that math in the conversions, they found that we're getting out 3 times more protein than we're putting into that animal, which I think is really tremendous. And, because when we think about some other proteins or some other food sources, that's a lot closer to a 1-to-1 type of relationship where whatever we're putting in, we're getting out. But that beef animal can really upcycle. And we know too, from that same research, then that we can feed more children than we can if we just took, say, a bushel of corn and fed that directly to children. And we're helping to better meet their amino acid requirements as well. And so that's some pretty neat research that I think really tells us about how amazing that beef animal is.
Well, certainly the farmers are always about value added. How do I take perhaps some land that isn't useful for corn or soybean or hay production and maybe have a cow-calf operation on it, and then later turn that beef calf over to a beef finisher or backgrounder. So there's land out there that would probably be totally unproductive from agriculture standpoint without beef animals or rumens, correct?
Correct. In the US, we know that in total, about 29% of the land in the US would be otherwise unusable. It's not arable. We can't cultivate it, we can't farm on it. And so that land would go idle, and would not produce value for the people who own it, certainly, and not offer them a return. But it allows us to capture, again, those nutrients, the grasses you and I can't eat, and to turn that into pretty tasty protein for all the rest of us.
Well said. Thank you, Myriah Johnson, National Cattlemen's Beef Association, Research Director of Sustainability. Appreciate your time here.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it.
Stay tuned for more on Farm Connections.
Farm Connections Best Practices, brought to you by
Hello, I'm Bruce Potter, Integrated Pest Management Specialist with the University of Minnesota Extension. And today on Best Practices, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a relatively new insect pest to Minnesota soybeans. Not that we didn't have enough pests before, but we picked up a new one. We confirmed it in Minnesota in 2018, although one of the growers had mentioned that he'd seen the problem for several years previous. In 2015 and through 2017, the insect was observed in eastern South Dakota, eastern Nebraska, western Iowa, but it was assumed to just be a secondary invader to soybean plants that were damaged by hail or disease. In 2018, this thing blew up in the spring, and we realized that this insect was capable of causing plant damage and death to soybeans all on its own. The adult larvae overwinter and pupate in the spring, and the adults emerge in mid-June. They lay eggs at the base of the soybean plant. If you're looking at the soybean field, a lot of times you'll see the damage worse on the edge of in fact, almost always you'll see damage worse on the edge of soybeans adjacent to the previous year's soybean crops, as that's where the adults move out of. To distinguish this from a disease, look at that lower stem, you'll see a dark discoloration. A lot of times there's kind of a black border between the green healthy tissue above and the damaged tissue below. But if you peel back that outer layer of the stem, the bark, if you will, you'll start to see some white to orange larvae in the stems. There's 3 larval instars, And they start out white. That last instar turns orange and is pretty distinctive. We've got a similar insect that feeds on white mold fungus, but this insect is not associated with white mold. It'll be on plants that are relatively disease-free. There's 3 flights of adults, the overwintering flight, one in July and another one in August. When the plant larvae are mature, they drop to the ground and pupate, and that last generation in August, the larvae are what overwinters. You'll start to see plants wilting in July, and again, damage is usually worse on the edge of the field, and as the season progresses, that damage affects more plants and moves further into the field. So if you see damage like that on your soybeans adjacent to last year's crop, pay some attention, take a look at what's underneath a few of the surface of some of those stems. We also have a scouting video available, and there's a soybeangallmage.org website that has quite a bit of information on this insect, fact sheets, webinars, when we're monitoring adult flights, so when those adults are out, will be posted on that as well. So thank you for listening. This has been Best Practices, and I'm Bruce Potter, the University of Minnesota Extension.
With us today is Darcy Johnson of the Conger Meat Market. Welcome, Darcy.
Hi, Dan. Welcome to Conger.
Well, it's a neat community. Tell us about your business and the town.
Well, the Conger Meat Market has been here for quite a while. It was established way back in 1935. My husband and I have owned it for about 17 years now. And we built a new USDA federal processing plant back in 2017. And so we've been in the new location since then.
Tell us about the employees or how many you have.
We're up to 20 employees right now. We are a live slaughter plant. So we have a couple butchers, and we are up to 5-10 people working the processing of the cutting, wrapping. And we also have 2 retail locations. So we're up to 5 people working retail.
So how many people live in Conger?
I'm going to say right around 160 people, I think, from the last population.
So with 20 employees, you're probably one of the largest employers in town?
We are the largest employer of Conger. Yes, we got a lot of people that drive to Conger to work here.
And recently we've had something called COVID-19. How did that impact your business?
Yes, about this time last year, when the large processing plants in the upper Midwest started to shut down, my phone started to ring, and it rang a lot. It rang about every 3 minutes. It was not sustainable to call everyone back or answer all the phone calls. What I realized within a few days of the crisis, the hog crisis, is that all these market weight pigs that were already loaded on semis in line, waiting to get processed in these large plants that were closed quite quickly, didn't have anywhere to go. Truck drivers, pork producers, they were desperate. They needed someplace to take these animals.
Certainly we're desperate. And of course, if we think about pork production, the farmers that had emptied pens or barns and loaded them onto pigs were expecting those hogs, their paycheck, so to speak, to be delivered to the large processors, harvested and turned into a product that was sold, and the farmers were expecting a paycheck. And of course, if the pigs are not unloaded and if they're not harvested, no paycheck, right?
That's right. And so, of course, we live in such a generous community. A lot of people were going, how can we help? What can we do? They were willing to buy these hogs. And a lot of times they were offering top dollar for these hogs because they wanted to help that farmer out. And they said, they were willing to donate the meat to the food shelves. There's a lot of food pantries that were closing at that time because they couldn't. find meat to fill the shelves. There's food pantries empty, the store shelves were empty. And there was people that were willing to help pay top dollar. But again, the processing, there was just no room for those hogs to get processed. And so it was, like I said, a real desperate situation for everyone.
All of a sudden, you were still going. How did you keep going? How did you keep your workers safe?
Well, that was a concern too. It was early on in the pandemic, and I think all of us business owners, were concerned for our employees' health and safety too. So as we're expecting them to pick up the pace and I'm going to take on more processing, it was very concerning. We have a great team here. Everybody stayed healthy. We did what we could to help out as much as possible. So we were very lucky and fortunate and blessed to stay healthy and to keep the store open. We never closed. So we were able to do what we could to keep our shelves full, even though we did get low too, because a lot of the pork that we were processing at that time was already sold, going out to other people. So it was hard to tell people we're doing what we can, but our store shelves are still empty too. So it was a very difficult time for a lot of people. It was a hard time to be a business owner, because you were concerned about your employees' health. Retail workers being out front with long lines of people coming in.
Well, you've certainly proven good leadership. You've certainly proven resiliency. But were there a moment or two during that time where you hit a low?
I think so. I think with answering the phone, because I was talking directly to these people that were desperate. I mean, when people were calling me, they didn't have a couple of hogs. They needed a place to go. We're talking hundreds. And I could hear it in their voice when I talked to them on the phone. And it did wear on us that I knowing I couldn't help everyone and saying sorry. I think everyone that called me at that time with a story, they all had a story. What do I do? The pigs are loaded. I can't bring them back to the farm. They had nowhere to turn. And I think hearing stories like that time after time, it wore on me a little bit. I did turn on an answering machine for a while and just left a message saying we're no longer accepting hog appointments. It was just a short time though. It was just a couple of days, and that happened. I talked to a lot of great people, and I know there was a lot of people from areas that I had never heard from before, from the big cities that were calling down, how can we help? And people really are so generous, and they wanted to help and do what they could. I know we had a load of pork going up to the Burnsville area, to a Burnsville area church, and they donated all that meat to first responders. And we were happy. I mean, that stories like that we were happy to help with that. And that was really neat that, like I said, people were so generous to the farmers at that time. They wanted to help in any way they could.
What would you do differently if there was anything when you look back over 2020?
Oh, wow. That's $1 million question here. What would I do differently? And I've been asked that if I could have foresee what was going to happen. I think we did the best job we possibly could have for 2020. I think we took on, and I refer to it as the summer of hogs. We took on as many hogs as we possibly could, and ramping up the processing, 2 days of pork versus one. I think we did everything we could. And I don't all speak for my plant. I speak for every small meat processing plant out there, because I know they were all in the same situation as we were here in Conger. And I think everybody did what we could to help with the crisis that was that happened rather quickly. We came out of it on the other end, and I think we did manage to pick up a lot of new customers that maybe didn't visit a small meat processing plant before, that thought, wow, I can buy local. And I think that is the whole takeaway from what happened in 2020.
Darcy Johnson, thanks for joining us on Farm Connections and telling your story.
And thank you so much for having me on your program today.
Unforeseen challenges arise daily. Preparedness and the ability to be flexible help to make sure we see ourselves through the difficult times and are able to help those around us. I'm Dan Hoffman. Thanks for joining us on Farm Connections.